Hey everybody, I just want to take a couple minutes to welcome you guys to nine, week nine, yeah, chapter seven. So chapter seven is covering technology and media. So you have your typical things to do. You have your quiz due Wednesday, and your discussion board is open till Friday. So make sure you're doing that. Again, this week is a written discussion. Um, so make sure you guys are staying on top of those things. And then next week we have spring break from the 18th through the 22nd. So we don't have anything going on. Remember that week after that, the Friday, the 29th, your rough draft is due. So go ahead and kind of start thinking about that. Kind of hopefully working on that. I understand. It's easier to put stuff off than start working on it ahead of time. Um, but keep that in mind. Let's do the 29th. Later this week, I'll post a little something kind of just going over some key things to keep in mind as you work on your rough draft and are getting ready to turn that in. That way, I can help maybe address some questions before they need to be answered, but also to kind of help us maybe get on the same page and getting those done and getting those turned in. And kind of going over what my expectations are for your rough draft. So keep in mind that's due the 29th, March 29th, which is a Friday. And then lastly, I want to spend a few moments kind of going over the exam and some of the bonus questions, mostly on that. For the most part, I thought everybody did really well on the exam. If you have any questions on that, your grade should be posted. So if you have any questions, or if there are any questions you're like, hey, can you take a look at this? Or if you're just not sure about your grade, please let me know. I'm willing to answer questions on that. I will answer them to the best that I can. So just let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I can get back to you on those and answer any questions that you have on the exam. So keep that in mind as you're looking at that, and know that it should be available to see. So if you can't see your grade on the exam, let me know so I can try to figure out why that may be, because sometimes I don't click something or it doesn't say when I click it, and it doesn't post in the manner that I anticipate it to. So if you come across anything like that, let me know. So, and then in terms of the bonus questions, I thought everybody's answers were very thoughtful, and I always enjoy reading them. I enjoy seeing what people have enjoyed learning about, and I also enjoy seeing what people would like to learn more about, because knowing what people want to know more about can help kind of drive the discussion online for the rest of the semester, but it can also help me kind of determine what y'all want to know more of, and so I can spend more time on those things or focus more on them, or provide you with information about them that may be relevant. So keep that in mind. So I'll keep those questions in mind too as we go throughout the last part of the semester. And anything that's relevant to kind of what we're covering, I'll try to do my best to either guide the discussions maybe towards some of those topics, or if the textbook may not address it as well, I'll try to pull in some outside resources on some of those topics people are interested in knowing more about or spending more time on. So keep that in mind, and I will keep those questions in mind too. And then the other question was dealing with course feedback. I always put this question on there for two reasons. I like to know if things are going well in certain aspects, but I also like to know ways in which I can do a better job, or I can make things easier or better for you in any way. And so I do obviously appreciate the positive feedback. That's always good to hear, especially on things that I do know I strive to do really well. I really do try to make it an easy class to follow along with. I do try to make it structured in a way that's easy to follow, and I try to keep things organized as best that I can. It's not always perfect, and I do make mistakes, but I really do try to do that, and so I'm glad that most of y'all think so far the course has been easy to follow along with, and that things are structured in a way that make it easy to stay on top of things and stay organized, and that the weekly videos kind of help remind you of where we need to be. So I appreciate that. I'm always looking to make changes when I teach. I'm always looking to improve things that need to be improved, even things that I may be doing well. So I really appreciate that. There were a couple topics too that people I think always have questions about, or concerns about, or suggestions about. And those are always things that I consider. Some of them can't necessarily be changed mid-semester. Some of them, unfortunately, will be things that I consider next semester. But it's always good to know that, so that I have those ideas or those questions as I'm restructuring the course a little bit every semester to improve it, to keep those things in mind. But one of the big topics that I saw mentioned in terms of something that people had some concerns about, or like, hey, I'd like to see this, or the discussions. So the first part of that is just the discussion questions in general. So I really do try to make the discussion questions relevant, clear, and applicable, and to take what we're reading and studying in that chapter and make it something that's applicable to what hopefully you're doing, or help you make it applicable to some of your career goals. Saying that, I know that it's not always perfect. All these discussions I created last semester, and so I've tweaked them some since last semester, and I made some tweaks throughout the semester last semester in the fall, and so I think they're getting better. They're not perfect, but if you guys have any that you're like, hey, I'm not sure about this, or if it seems too narrow, let me know and I'll look at it, because sometimes having somebody else point that out makes it easier for me to see from your perspective. So don't hesitate to email me with any concerns about the discussion questions. I do try to make them better each time that I look at them and read them, and kind of go through this course. I do try to improve them, but yeah, they're not always going to be best. It's a little bit of trial and error, but I do appreciate your feedback on that. And like I said, as we go throughout the rest of the semester, if there's any questions you have on the discussion questions that are posted, or any suggestions, I am open to that. And I appreciate that kind of stuff throughout the semester as well. The next thing was in terms of the written discussion boards or Flipgrid. So the first thing on that I'll say is each semester I teach a class. It varies greatly in how much people enjoy the Flipgrid discussion. So one semester, maybe the majority of the class is like, yeah, Flipgrid, I love Flipgrid, let's keep doing it. And then some semesters, it'll be like, oh, I hate doing video posts, I don't want to do this at all, I don't enjoy this, let's never do that again. And so I try to find a healthy balance of the two. Some semesters I end up doing more written discussion. Some semesters I end up doing more Flipgrid. And I'm still trying to find that balance. And so that's why you may not see as many Flipgrid as maybe you would like if you enjoy it. But keep in mind that there's some people who may not enjoy that as much. And so they're probably happy that there's less. So I try to do at least 5 to 6 Flipgrid discussions a semester. Just to kind of keep at least a near balance between the two. And so that's kind of the purpose of that, and why there's not an overload of Flipgrid. I also think the two written and the video posts require different skills, and people have a different level of comfortability with those two mediums for doing discussion. So I try to meet both needs in terms of that, in terms of what people like or feel more comfortable doing. I think it's good to feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, but I don't want people to feel like stressed about the discussion board or feel uncomfortable doing it. That's not what it's intended to do. The discussion is really intended for us to share our thoughts, share our perspectives, and gain perspective from others. So that's kind of the main goal of that. So I don't want people to stress or feel uncomfortable doing it. And that's why I try not to overload it with Flipgrid. So, but I do appreciate that. It's definitely, in terms of like doing more Flipgrid, I do think about that a lot, and I think, how much should I do? How much is too much? How much is, like, how little should I do? How much should I do? Is it too much? Is it too little? So I do think about that. And the feedback on it that I get every semester changes quite a bit, and so it's kind of hit or miss on the satisfaction level for it. So I do think about that as well. And then the thing I always get comments about on that question from the test is the quizzes, and it's different feedback each semester, so that's unique and interesting. This semester I had a few comments about the time limit, and that's something I think about each time I have quizzes online or tests, how much time is too much, how much time is too little. Um, and I've talked with peers and others who've taught classes in similar fashions how much time they would give on a quiz online. And so we've kind of settled on that 15 to 20 minute range. And with 15 questions, it's a minute a question. That's pretty reasonable looking at kind of the science behind it. And I also teach this class in a face-to-face section, and they also only get 15 minutes to take the individual quiz. So it's something that I try to keep consistent across both formats as well. So that's kind of why it is 15 minutes. Because if you start getting too much longer than that, and the purpose of the quiz is just to make sure you've read, not necessarily that you're able to apply. And so if you make it much longer than that, it becomes much easier to look up answers in the textbook or look up answers online. And so like I said, the purpose of the quiz is to kind of make sure you've read and that you're able to go ahead and remember some key terms, key people, key ideas, but not necessarily apply those ideas yet. So that's kind of why the time limit is what it is on those. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. I also had a couple comments on some questions not being great, and that is definitely true. But I do go back and look at every quiz within a couple weeks usually, and I'll look at the question statistics and see kind of what that looks like. And I try to look at those questions and be fair and say, okay, was that a good question? It may have seemed like a good question when I made it, but it may not seem like a great question now. And so I try to always go back and make adjustments to grades, mark questions that need to be fixed. So these quizzes were all made last semester, and so I've changed them some since last semester. I've made some edits to questions that I picked up on last semester that weren't great questions, either in the wording or the structure or the answer choices. And I've made some decisions to edit those or change them completely. And so I'm still doing that this semester in terms of each quiz. So sometimes, unfortunately, yeah, there's still some questions that aren't great. But sometimes it's hard, I think, in the time making a quiz, reading the quiz, knowing the material as I do. Sometimes it's hard to notice when a question doesn't make sense or it's not clear or the answer choices are too similar or the answer choices aren't good or the structure of the question is poor. So sometimes it's hard to see some of that till after the quiz has been taken and you can see, okay, well, they really struggled on this, and now I'm reading it again, knowing that they struggled on this question. I can see where that struggle came from. So, yeah, I understand that some of the questions may not be great as you read them, but I do try every quiz to make sure that they do make sense, but sometimes they do elude me and they don't make sense. So, I'm always, like I said, I always go back and check the quizzes, check the question statistics, and make sure that there aren't some just really poor questions. And every now and then there are some that are, and I try to award points back on those questions that are. So keep that in mind. Again, I really appreciate all of the feedback, positive and negative, because it's all useful. It points to things to keep doing well, it points to things to think about, and it points to things to change completely. And I think that's important. To utilize that feedback, I think it's important to acknowledge that feedback because it's an important part of being a professional. It's an important part of being a student. And so I try to really utilize that and gather as much feedback as possible. So I really appreciate you guys all answering that question. And I felt like everybody took time to give a thoughtful response, whether it was all positive stuff or whether it was a mixture or whether it was just negative feedback, things to think about. I really appreciate that. And like I said, if there's anything throughout the rest of this semester that you're like, hey, I got a question about this, it doesn't seem to make sense, or can we do it differently? Let me know. And I'm open to that. I'm open to those suggestions. I'm open to those questions. So I apologize for the length of this video, but you guys have a good week.